What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. Today we're going to be going over kind of a generic stamina beginner build video. So this is really going to be focusing in more on the gear itself. We'll talk a little bit behind skills if you don't want to use weapon power potions, so you can get your major brutality and major savagery, but mostly this is going to be talking about skills. This is kind of going to, not skills, gear. This is really going to be focused in on providing you guys with the gear necessary to kind of equip pretty much any class in the game. So while I am on my Nightblade right now, this build is not necessarily going to be limited to just Nightblades. The gear is going to be pretty much identical across all different classes, and it's just basically going to be up to you to kind of go to the other build videos with your specific class. So for example, a Stamina Templar, you can go check out my video there and fix your skill bars accordingly for the Stamina Templar. Same thing here with the rotation, and very similar to the beginner sort of Magicka build video that I released a few days ago, where we're really just going to be focusing in on what is common among all different classes, because obviously all the different classes do have different skills, different rotations, different DPS potentials, and I kind of want to not release 5 different videos that would basically just be the exact same thing, just with a different on a different class. So, unlike the rest of our build videos, we're really focusing in on the gear. So I'm just going to give you guys one particular gear set, and one thing I do want to mention here is that the gear that I'm using is assuming that we're only able to get base game stuff. So base game dungeons, crafted sets, and overland sets are what we're limited to. Not going to be using any sort of DLC dungeon sets or DLC trial sets. We're not even going to be using any of the trial sets specifically here. Just because this is kind of the assumption is that this is just gear you can slap together very quickly or farm very quickly to slap onto a stamina DPS that you just managed to hit, CP 160. So that's going to be kind of the focus behind this video here. We'll talk a little bit about skills like I mentioned earlier, in case you guys don't want to use weapon power potions, and then CPs as well. We'll talk about the 810, but really we'll be focusing in on CP 300 here, because that's generally speaking when you're going to be in a good spot to at the very least begin to take a look at vet trials and endgames content. So I'll be doing a CP 300 setup here for you guys. Again, for specific skill bar setups for a specific class, you will need to turn to a meta build video, like the ones that I have on my channel, or perhaps on Alcast's webpage or Fear Turbo's webpage, or you can kind of make it up as you go along too, depending on whether you're doing like solo content or you're doing looking to do more group-oriented stuff here. And similarly, because we're not really taking a look at any sort of like skill bars, we won't really be doing a rotation. I am on my Nightblade, and so I'll show you guys a parse using this particular setup here, this beginner setup here, so you guys can get a point of comparison to my more meta stamina Nightblade build there. So starting things off here with gear, again, assuming that we only have access to base game stuff here. So for Monster Helm sets, because we can't get Veladreth, because Veladreth is a DLC set, we're going to be using Celine's instead. Celine's is probably going to be the best Monster Helm set for pure damage on a stamina DPS, that's base game. Comes from Celine's Web, and we are going with 1 heavy with the 1 max health enchant here. This is just to give you a little bit more survivability. We're assuming that you're not really going to push for really high DPS, otherwise you would be running a medium with the max stamina enchant. We are using our Temtekwe broth, so that's why we do need the additional health there. And we are in a dark elf, so if we were an orc, we would actually have a little bit more health. So if you're a dark elf like I am here, you might want to consider putting another health enchant somewhere, whether that's a large piece or a small piece is up to you, just to give yourself a little bit more survivability here. So 16k health is pretty much like the very bare minimum you're going to need for vet trials. So you can always bump that up a little bit, put attributes into health. You can get another health enchant. It's kind of up to you how you want to do that. Then we have our first set, which is going to be Hunding's Rage. This is a crafted set, base game set, so you do need to know 6 traits in order to craft this yourself, but you can also get somebody else to craft it for you if you have the materials. A lot of people will just craft it for you as long as you provide materials for the upgrade stuff. So pretty easy set to obtain here, and we are going with Hunding's weapons here, so we have the Bow of Hunding's Rage and Daggers of Hunding's Rage here. More on that on a little bit. And our second set, this is a dungeon set. This is going to be Leviathan. This comes from Crypt of Hearts, either 1 or 2. 1 is obviously going to be a lot easier here. Now, I have the gold pieces here because I am on the PTS, and it does not allow you to get purple jewelry on the PTS. But the maximum rarity you'll be able to get with Leviathan would be purple if you're doing Crypt of Hearts 1 on or 2 on Vet. So just keep that in mind when we look at our DPS. It's going to be a little bit inflated just because we do have all gold versus 3 purple jewelry here. Now, we are going with Leviathan on the jewelry rather than Hundings because jewelry crafting is still fairly expensive. You can still get the materials to pay somebody to craft Hundings jewelry for you, but it is still expensive, especially if you want to upgrade it all the way up to purple or gold. So just keep that in mind. I prefer to run my Overland / Farmal sets kind of on jewelry and 2 armor pieces. So I have the Leviathan boots and Leviathan bracers here. So this does require you to farm. If you don't want to farm and you just want to go straight for like a purchasable set, there are a few overland sets that aren't terrible. So you are limited to medium armor overland sets just because we are assuming you aren't able to transmute any jewelry at all. So the one that I would probably recommend most would be Spriggan's Thorns for additional penetration. This comes from Bankurai. So if you want to go ahead and do kind of dolmen farming, you can definitely do it in Bankurai to get the jewelry for Spriggan's Thorns here. Another good one to hold on to would be, where is it here? Red Mountain. That's going to be a little bit class dependent, but for things like Nightblades and Templars where you have a lot of class abilities, then Shadow of Red Mountain's not a bad set. This comes from Stonefalls. But if you don't want either of them, Briarheart's always a classic go-to from Rothgar. It's going to be more expensive to buy than something like Shadows of Red Mountain, and obviously you can farm it yourself, but you don't have access to Rothgar, so you're limited to buying it. So that's why I probably wouldn't go with Briarheart necessarily as a beginner set, just because it does cost a lot of money to get the Briarheart daggers going. But other than that, you can also go something like Unfathomable Darkness if you would like. That's a pretty easy set to obtain, very cheap, has a physical penetration bonus there, so not terrible set. But if you had to choose, I'd probably say don't bother going for Unfathomable Darkness, go for Shadow Red Mountain, depending on whether you are in a class that has a class spamble like Nightblade or the Templar. So a couple of overland set options there, but the kind of generic, pretty decent set would be Spriggan's Thorns, which is pretty easy to obtain overall. So that's pretty much it for gear. All of your armor should be Divines with max stamina enchant, except for that one heavy shoulders piece here with a max health enchant here. You have weapon damage on all of our jewelry. For weapons, go for double sharpened. You can also go Nern main hand, but that's a little bit more expensive to get there. Double sharpened pulls about the same DPS as Nern main hand and sharpened offhand. It just depends on whether you are putting your CPs correctly. If you don't want to run double ravage health poisons like I have here, you can go with poison enchant and an absorb stamina enchant. Your bow back bar should be infused with a weapon damage enchant. Now, the double ravage health poisons are fairly cheap to make if you buy all the ingredients yourself. It's going to be Nightshade, Nirnroot, and Violet Coprinus, or Fleshfly Larva. Generally speaking, Fleshfly Larva, I believe it's Nirnroot and Nightshade. That'll give you the cheapest combination for double ravage health poisons there. So pretty easy to obtain. Generally speaking, the potions and poisons that you are going to be using as a stem DPS are cheaper than Magicka DPS potions. But again, we'll be going over this when we go over skills. You might not want to run weapon power potions because they do start to run you a lot if you're using them fairly often. So we will be talking about some skills you can use instead for get your major brutality and major savagery. For your character sheet, Dark Elves and Orcs are going to be the 2 best options. The Orcs give you a little bit of additional health there, so that's going to be very useful for overall survivability. You get 1,000 additional max health as an Orc. So 64 points into stamina. You can put some points into health to get you up to 17k health if you would like. That would give you about 8 or so, 7 or 8 points into health will get you up to 17k if you're running one heavy with the health enchant there. Shadow Mundus here, still the strongest Mundus in the game, and then we are using our Tame Takeaway Broth. You can also use Dubious Camoran Throne because our Tame Takeaway Broth is still fairly expensive to either create or purchase yourself. So Dubious Camoran Throne will give you just a little bit less max stats, so just bear with that. You will get probably about 200 less health if you're running Dubious Camoran Throne rather than a Tame Takeaway Broth, so just be mindful of that. and adjust your health accordingly. And then Vampirism is optional. You do get 10% additional stamina regen as a vampire, which may be useful depending on your class and your overall sustain. But you do end up taking more damage from fire, and your health regen is slower. So just keep that in mind. There's a bit of a trade-off with Vampirism, so you can decide up to yourself whether you want to be a vampire or not. It is going to be a little bit class dependent. So for example, Nightblades have really good sustain, so you don't really need the Vampirism to help out. But other classes might need it, especially classes like Necromancer. If you have Elsweyr. None of the base game classes, except maybe the Elsweyr, will need the additional regen. The other classes, you're pretty much safe without the vampirism there. And then for skills, again, this is a kind of generic build, so we're not going to be going over skills specifically. In terms of where to get Major Brutality, there's pretty much 2 ways to get Major Brutality, depending on if you're using dual-wield front bar or two-handed front bar. For dual-wield front bar, then you can use Flying Blade or Shrouded Daggers for your Major Brutality. This will give you Major Brutality for 20 seconds, and because this will be replace your spam bowl, you don't have to worry about using really any potions at all if you're running this ability with dual wield. So this basically replace, for example, if I'm on a Nightblade, it would replace Surprise Attack, so that way I'd get the Major Brutality up. It does end up costing a little bit more stamina compared to some abilities, but it's going to still be pretty useful if you don't want to use potions at all. If you're running two-handed, then you can run Momentum instead for the Major Brutality. This is a buffing move, so it is going to be a little bit of DPS loss, so you are going to be giving up one damaging move to use for Momentum or Rally. So just keep that in mind there. But it is going to be the best way to get Major Brutality if you're using a two-handed front bar. There are no really moves on the bow that'll give you Major Brutality, so pretty much you're limited to either running Hidden Blade or Momentum. And then for Major Savagery, really some classes have access to some form of Major Savagery, but the class agnostic would be the Fighter Skill ability Expert Hunter. You can just slot that in, and you'd get the Major Savagery buff. Now that is going to be a DPS loss depending on your specific class. So for example, Nightblade, if I wanted to use no potions and get Major Brutality and Major Savagery, I would have to give up probably Rearming Trap for Expert Hunter, and I'd replace Surprise Attack with Hidden Blade. So it is going to be a little bit class dependent here. Generally speaking, you are safe to replace Rearming Trap with Expert Hunter here. You will be giving up that minor force unless you keep it on the back bar. So on a Nightblade here, for example, I would just replace Dark Shade with a Rearming Trap and put Expert Hunter here where Rearming Trap is and just rerun Rearming Trap on the back bar. Most stamina builds will have a couple of flex spots here, so you can get a little bit of additional sort of flexibility when it comes to putting down Expert Hunter and your Major Brutality source there. Now if you do need a heal, because you should be running Caltrops, you will get Vigor in the process of getting Caltrops, and you can run Vigor, pretty much replace it anywhere here. Nightblades, don't really worry about it too much because you do have Leeching Strikes, which does give you a nice heal with your light and heavy attacks, but if you're not really good at weaving, then Resolving Vigor is going to be a little bit better. For healing, for example, on a Nightblade, but it is going to be a little bit class dependent. So for example, Stampsorks typically run Dark Deal, which will have a healing component associated with that, so you would just use Dark Deal if you need the heal. A little bit of cast time associated with it, but it is consistent, and you won't necessarily need to fix up your bars or anything like that. So you do have some flexibility with stamina stuff, just because the classes do have a lot of different variety when it comes to what skills they're using there. So this is kind of the most class agnostic way to gain those utilities that you might need as a beginner DPS. Now for our CP points. So I'll show you guys a CP 300 setup here. So that would give you 100 points across all your different constellation colors. So for your green CPs, oh, that is a weird shit. Okay, now it's done. So your green CPs, you can put pretty much all of them into Mooncalf if you'd like. You can drop it down to 75 if you'd like, and then put the remaining 25 into Nasty, like so. Generally speaking, though, you do want to focus in on Mooncalf as your CP points when you're just starting off with 300 CP. For your blue CPs, you're pretty much going to put them all in here. You do want to get that perfect strike passive there. So I would start off with piercing just because penetration is the easiest way to get good DPS. So it'd probably start off with something like, 23 or so piercing, and put Elsweyr here. So 23 mighty perhaps. Then you'd probably do 20 piercing, 20 thaumaturge, the remaining 14 go into mastered arms here. So you are at CP 300, so you will be missing a few jump points here and there, but do your best to try to hit those jump points where you can. And your red CPs, pretty balanced. Still gonna go for the balanced approach. So 27 Hardy, 27 Elemental Defender, and you do 23 Sticks and 23 Ironclad like so. That's gonna be your 100 points that way. So that's gonna be a CP 300 setup here. So red CP is pretty easy, just pretty evenly split. Green CPs focus in on Mooncalf, and then your blue CPs, it's going to be a little bit tricky, but this is a pretty decent one to start off with. 23 Piercing, 23 Mighty, 20 Precise Strikes, 20 Thaumaturge, 14 Mastered Arms. If you're max CP, then just check out like a meta video for build for whatever class you happen to be on. So that's pretty much it. So for the build itself, now again, this is fairly class agnostic. You can pretty much run this gear on any class and you'll be very successful. But I am on my Nightblade, and I did do a parse beforehand to kind of get an idea of how much DPS I would actually be losing here. So here's the parse here. So you can see we pulled 70.6k, and if you guys check out my Stamina Nightblade video, the meta build pulled about 81.8k. So we're losing about 11k DPS or so. This is without, remember, we don't have any Bloodthirsty jewelry. We're not really optimizing. We don't have any Major Slayer from Lachesis. We don't have Minor Slayer at all, actually. So considering that we only lost 11k DPS, that's pretty decent. Rotation is going to be a lot more important than gear is for your overall DPS. This is with the 810 CP, so I'm assuming we're using max CP here, just to get an accurate comparison after all. So you can see here that you're still able to pull very good DPS with this sort of beginner set, as long as you're able to master your overall rotation here. So that's probably the most important thing for anybody who wants to get started into vet content, is to really master your rotation. Gear is only gonna make up so much. You can see here that with Hundings, Leviathan, and Selene, we're about 10 to 11k short of what we could potentially pull, at least what I could potentially pull using the more meta setups here. So definitely practice your rotation in order to get the best DPS out of your specific class. And again, if you do want it, if you're not using a Nightblade, then take a look at other classes, the other build videos, whether that's from myself or from other content creators, so you guys can get an idea of what your rotation should look like. So that is going to be it for this build video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. If you guys have any questions, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.